When the townspeople of Cedar Falls cast Mercy Caldwell into the churning Yellowstone River, condemning her twisted arm as a devil's curse, they believed they'd rid themselves of misfortune forever. But 20 miles downstream, a grizzled mountain man pulled more than just a broken woman from those waters. He pulled out a healer, whose true power would soon shake the very foundations of the town that threw her away. What happens when the cursed woman they tried to drown returns not as a victim, but as the answer to their prayers? Thunder crashed above Cedar Falls as angry voices filled the town square. Mercy Caldwell pressed her back against the wooden post, her twisted left arm throbbing from where they'd tied the ropes. The year 1879 had brought nothing but trouble to Montana Territory, and now the townspeople wanted someone to blame. "She's the reason our corn died," shouted Baker Williams, his flour-covered apron still white despite the evening rain. "Ever since she touched my daughter's fever, everything's gone wrong." Mercy's heart pounded like a drum. She'd helped little Amy Williams get better from her sickness, but now they said her crooked arm carried evil spirits. The crowd grew bigger and meaner as more people joined in, their faces twisted with fear and anger. "Please," she whispered, but her voice got lost in the storm. Reverend Ashford stepped forward, his black coat flapping in the wind like raven wings. His Bible shook in his hands as he pointed at her. "The good book says we must cast out evil. This woman brings darkness wherever she goes." Mrs. Henderson held her crying baby closer. "My crops turned brown right after she walked past my field. She's cursed, I tell you." Mercy wanted to scream that she'd never hurt anyone. She'd spent her whole life trying to help people, using her good hand to make medicine from plants and herbs. But her different arm made people scared. And scared people didn't listen to reason. The rope burned her wrists as they dragged her toward the river. The Yellowstone ran high and fast from spring snow melting in the mountains. Its dark water looked hungry, ready to swallow anything they threw into it. "Wait!" she cried out, digging her heels into the muddy ground. "I never hurt nobody. I helped Amy get well. I helped old Mr. Peterson with his bad back." But Baker Williams just laughed, a sound colder than the river itself. "Help? You call bringing the devil's luck to our town help?" They reached the water's edge where sharp rocks stuck up like broken teeth. The current moved so fast it made white foam as it rushed past. Mercy had never learned to swim. Who would teach a girl with a crooked arm? "Lord, forgive us for what we must do," Reverend Ashford said. But his eyes looked excited, not sorry. The first push sent her stumbling toward the water. The second push was harder. Then came the final shove that sent her flying into the cold, dark current that would either kill her or carry her toward whatever came next. The last thing she saw was the town's lights growing smaller as the angry water pulled her away from everything she'd ever known. Dawn painted the mountains pink and gold as Ezra Thornfield checked his beaver traps along the river bend. 20 miles downstream from Cedar Falls, the water ran quieter here, winding through tall pine trees and rocky shores. He'd been trapping these waters for 8 years, ever since he'd buried his wife Martha and decided people caused too much heartache. Something bright caught his eye between the river rocks, a piece of torn cloth that didn't belong in his wild place. "What in tarnation?" he muttered, wading into the cold current. Then he saw her. A young woman lay face down in the shallow water, her long brown hair spread out like seaweed. Her dress was ripped and muddy, and one arm looked different from the other, shorter and twisted. Most folks would have seen that arm and thought, crippled. But Ezra saw something else. He saw how her fingers, even unconscious, still gripped a small leather pouch like she was protecting something important. "Well, I'll be," he said, lifting her carefully from the water. She was light as a bird, but tough. He could tell from the calluses on her hands and the way she'd managed to keep that pouch safe, even while drowning. Her breathing came shallow and weak. Water trickled from her mouth as he carried her up the bank toward his log cabin, hidden in the trees. Every step made him think about Martha, how she'd died in his arms while he couldn't do nothing to save her. This stranger might die too, but at least he could try. Inside the cabin, He laid her on Martha's old quilt and started a fire in the stone fireplace. The woman's skin felt cold as river rocks, and her lips had turned blue. He'd seen enough frontier sickness to know she was fighting for her life. "Come on, little sparrow," he whispered, covering her with every blanket he owned. "Don't let them river rats win." For 3 days, she drifted between sleeping and waking, sometimes talking to people who weren't there. She called out names, Amy, Mr. Peterson, and begged someone not to hurt her. Her fever broke on the 4th day, and she opened eyes the color of summer sky. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice scratchy like sandpaper. "Safe," Ezra said, stirring a pot of rabbit stew. "Name's Ezra Thornfield. Found you in the river, looking more dead than alive." She tried to sit up, wincing as her body reminded her what she'd been through. "They threw me in. Said I was cursed because my arm." She looked down at her twisted limb with shame. "Your arm didn't make you cursed," Ezra said, handing her a warm bowl. "But it might have made you lucky. That river could have killed you, but instead it brought you here." Rain hammered against the cabin windows like angry fists, but inside, warmth flickered from the stone fireplace. Mercy's eyes opened slowly, her mind swimming through layers of pain and confusion. The bearded giant sat nearby, carving something from a piece of pine wood, his massive hands surprisingly gentle with the blade. "You've been talking in your sleep for 3 days, he said without looking up. "Kept asking someone named Annie to forgive you." Mercy tried to sit up, wincing as fire shot through her ribs. Where am I?" "My cabin. 20 miles downriver from wherever those fools threw you in." His knife paused mid-cut. "Name's Ezra Thornfield. Been living up here since 1871. The memories crashed back like the river itself. The stones, the shouting, the cold water filling her lungs. Her twisted left arm throbbed, but she was alive. Somehow, impossibly alive. "They said I cursed their crops," she whispered, staring at her shortened fingers. "Said God marked me as evil." Ezra snorted, setting down his carving. "God marks lots of things. Don't make them evil." He ladled soup from a pot hanging over the fire. "This arm of yours, it work?" She nodded, demonstrating by flexing her fingers. They moved strangely, but they moved. "Then it ain't broken, just different. Like my Martha used to say, the prettiest flowers don't always grow straight." The soup was rabbit stew, rich and warming. As she ate, Mercy studied this mountain man who'd saved her life. His cabin was simple but clean, with books stacked beside the fireplace and pressed flowers between their pages. Not what she'd expected from a hermit. "Why did you help me?" she asked. Ezra was quiet for a long moment, whittling again. "Found a half-dead sparrow once, wing all twisted from a hawk attack. Martha insisted we nurse it back to health." His knife sliced away a curl of wood. That bird couldn't fly straight, but it could sing prettier than any robin in the territory. Outside, thunder rolled across the mountains. Mercy pulled the quilt closer, feeling safer than she had in years. But safety was a luxury she'd never been allowed to keep. "What happens when I'm well enough to leave?" she asked. Ezra looked up from his carving, his gray eyes unreadable. "Well, I reckon that depends on whether you want to keep running from who you are or start figuring out who you might become." Lightning split the sky, illuminating the carved wooden bird in his hands. A sparrow with one wing shorter than the other, but positioned as if it were about to take flight. Morning brought golden sunlight streaming through the cabin windows, and with it, the sound of Mercy moving around the kitchen area. Ezra woke to the smell of actual breakfast, not just the hardtack and coffee he'd survived on for 8 years. "You don't have to cook," he said, pulling on his boots. "I want to." She stood at the stove, her shortened arm holding the pan steady, while her right hand worked the eggs. "It's been a long time since I could cook for someone who might actually enjoy it." The eggs were perfect, seasoned with wild herbs she'd found in his stores. They ate in comfortable silence, watching deer graze in the meadow beyond the cabin. It felt natural, this quiet morning routine, as if they'd been sharing breakfasts for years instead of days. "Tell me about your Martha," Mercy said, refilling his coffee cup. Ezra's face softened. "She was small like you, but fierce as a wildcat when riled. Came west with her family in '68, but they died of cholera crossing the plains. I found her trying to bury them all by herself." He smiled at the memory. "Married her 3 weeks later. Figured anyone that stubborn deserved looking after. What happened to her? Fever took her in '71. Lost the baby she was carrying too." His voice stayed steady, but his hands tightened around his cup. "Thought about following them, but the mountains wouldn't let me. Kept finding reasons to stay alive. Injured animals, lost travelers, broken things that needed fixing." Mercy reached across the table, her twisted fingers covering his weathered hand. "Maybe they sent me here." That afternoon, she helped him tend his trap lines, her shorter arm proving surprisingly useful for reaching into tight spaces. She moved through the forest like she belonged there, reading animal signs and weather patterns with natural instinct. "You ever think about going back to town?" Ezra asked as they walked along the creek. "Which town would have me?" She knelt beside a beaver dam, studying its construction. Cedar Falls made their feelings clear. Other places would be the same once they saw this. She held up her twisted arm. "Not all places, not all people." That evening, as they sat on the porch watching stars emerge over the peaks, Mercy felt something she'd never experienced, the possibility of belonging somewhere. But in the distance, faint and carried on the wind, came the sound every mountain dweller learned to fear. Hoofbeats. Multiple horses, riding hard through the night. "Ezra," she whispered, her blood turning cold. "Someone's coming." A rider's horse collapsed just 50 feet from Ezra's cabin, foam dripping from its mouth like white paint. The animal had been pushed too hard, too fast, and now 3 men stood in the mountain meadow, looking angrier than hungry wolves. "Ezra Thornfield," the biggest man shouted, his badge catching sunlight like a warning. Deputy Marshal Wilson had ridden hard from Cedar Falls, bringing 2 others whose guns hung ready on their hips. Mercy dropped her basket of wild berries, purple juice staining her fingers like bruises. She recognized Wilson immediately. He was the same man who had watched silently when they threw her in the river 4 months ago. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird trying to escape. "Run to the cabin," Ezra whispered, but his voice carried steel underneath the softness. "Get my rifle from above the fireplace." "We know you're hiding her, mountain man," Wilson called out, spitting tobacco juice into the grass. "That cursed woman belongs back in Cedar Falls. Our crops have been dying since she escaped that river. Children getting sick, horses going lame. She's brought nothing but bad luck." Ezra stepped forward, his huge frame blocking the path to his home. "Only bad luck I see is 3 armed men riding onto my property without invitation." The second rider, a thin man with nervous eyes, fidgeted with his gun handle. "Just give us the woman, Thornfield. Nobody needs to get hurt over some broken girl." "Broken?" Mercy's voice cut across the meadow like a sharp knife. She emerged from the cabin carrying Ezra's rifle, but she held it carefully, not pointing it at anyone yet. "The only thing broken around here is your courage, Deputy Wilson." Wilson's face turned red as a sunset. "You don't get to speak to lawmen like that, girl. You're coming back to face justice for the curse you've put on our town." "What curse?" Mercy walked closer, her shorter arm swinging naturally at her side. "Tell me exactly what terrible things happened after I left." "The Henderson baby cries all night," Wilson said, counting on his fingers. "Old man Fisher can barely walk. The wheat came up stunted. Mrs. Parker's chickens stopped laying eggs." Ezra almost smiled, but kept his face serious. "Sounds like normal troubles to me. Babies cry. Old folks ache. Crops fail when you plant them wrong." The third rider, younger than the others, shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Maybe she ain't the cause of." "Shut your mouth, Billy," Wilson snapped. "We came here to bring back the cursed one, and that's what we're doing." Thunder rolled across the mountain peaks, though no clouds darkened the sky. The sound made everyone look up, giving Mercy a moment to study the 3 faces before her. Wilson showed anger and fear mixed together like oil and water. The thin man seemed ready to run at the first loud noise. But young Billy looked confused, like he was starting to question why they'd ridden so far for one small woman. "You want to take me back?" Mercy asked, setting down the rifle but staying within reach of it. "Then answer me this. Did any of these terrible things start before I was thrown in that river?" Wilson opened his mouth, then closed it again. "The Henderson baby was born sickly in February." Mercy continued. "Old Fisher hurt his back falling off his horse in January. Your wheat fields flood every spring because you plant them too close to the creek. And Mrs. Parker's chickens are old. They stop laying because that's what old chickens do." The young rider named Billy straightened in his saddle. "She's right about the Henderson baby. It was born months before." "I said shut up!" Wilson's hand moved toward his gun. That's when everything changed. Ezra's hand snapped to his rifle faster than a snake striking, the metal barrel swinging toward Wilson's chest before the deputy could clear his holster. The thin rider yelped and yanked his horse sideways, nearly falling from his saddle in panic. "Easy, gentlemen," Ezra said, his voice calm as still water, but his eyes sharp as winter ice. "Let's keep this conversation friendly." Wilson froze with his gun half drawn, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool mountain air. "You're making a big mistake, Thornfield. Pointing weapons at lawmen is a hanging offense. So is murder," Mercy said quietly, stepping between the men with her chin raised high. "Which is what you tried to do to me at that river." Young Billy's horse danced nervously underneath him. "Wait a minute. Murder? We were told she just disappeared, that maybe she ran off or something." Wilson's face went pale as fresh snow. "Billy, don't listen to her lies." "What lies?" Mercy turned to face the young rider directly. "Billy, isn't it? How old are you?" 19, ma'am. "Were you there that day, by the river?" Billy shook his head. "No, ma'am. I was working cattle up north. Didn't get back to town until June." "Then let me tell you what really happened." Mercy's voice carried across the meadow like a church bell, clear and strong. "Your deputy Wilson and half the town dragged me to the Yellowstone River because they blamed my twisted arm for their troubles. They threw stones at me. Then they pushed me into the current during spring flood." The thin rider's mouth fell open. "Jesus Christ, Wilson. You said she just left town." "She's lying," Wilson shouted, but his voice cracked like a boy's. "She's cursed, I tell you. Everything went wrong after she came back from the dead." "Came back from the dead?" Billy repeated slowly. "You mean you really thought she drowned?" Ezra kept his rifle steady but spoke to the young man. "Found her caught in rocks 20 miles downstream, more dead than alive. Took weeks of nursing to bring her back." Billy stared at Wilson with growing horror. "You tried to kill her? An unarmed woman? She brought evil to our town." Wilson's gun finally cleared his holster, but his hand shook badly. "Look at her arm! It's marked by the devil." "The only evil I see," Mercy said, taking another step forward despite the weapon pointed at her, "is a man so afraid of what he doesn't understand that he'd rather commit murder than face his own fears." The thin rider suddenly wheeled his horse around. "I ain't part of no killing. Wilson, you lied to us." He spurred his mount and galloped away, disappearing into the trees faster than smoke in wind. Billy remained, but his hand moved away from his gun. "Ma'am, if what you're saying is true, I'm mighty sorry. Wilson told us you were some kind of witch who cursed the town and ran off. He never said nothing about throwing you in no river." "Because he knows it was wrong," Mercy replied. "Just like he knows my arm didn't cause a single one of Cedar Falls' problems." Wilson's gun wavered between Mercy and Ezra, his breathing coming in short gasps. "You don't understand." The whole town agreed. "Everyone said you were cursed. Everyone wanted you gone." "Everyone?" Mercy asked softly. "Or just the people too scared to speak up for what was right?" Thunder rolled again, closer this time, and the first fat raindrops began to fall. Wilson's horse shifted restlessly beneath him, sensing the storm coming in more ways than one. Young Billy dismounted and walked toward Wilson, his hands empty and visible. "Deputy, I think you better put that gun away. This woman ain't done nothing wrong, and we both know it." "Stay back!" Wilson swung the pistol toward Billy. "She's got you under her spell, too." "The only spell here," Ezra said quietly, "is the one fear casts on weak minds." That's when Mercy made her choice. Instead of stepping back from the gun, she walked straight toward Wilson, her strange arm swinging at her side like a badge of honor rather than shame. "Go ahead," she said, stopping just 5 feet from his horse. "Pull that trigger. Prove to everyone here that you're exactly the kind of man who murders innocent women." Wilson's finger trembled on the trigger, but something in Mercy's steady gaze made his resolve crumble like old paper. The gun slowly lowered until it pointed at the ground. Fire blazed from the windows of the Henderson farmhouse, painting the October night in angry orange. Mercy pressed her face against the cold cabin window, watching the distant flames dance against the mountains. Something terrible was happening in Cedar Falls, and every instinct told her it was connected to her. "That's the third fire this week," Ezra said, pulling on his boots. His weathered hands moved quickly, checking his rifle. Wilson and his boys didn't go home empty-handed like they claimed. The sound of galloping horses grew louder, echoing off the canyon walls. Not 3 riders this time, but many. Mercy's heart hammered as she counted the torches approaching through the trees. At least a dozen men rode toward their sanctuary, their faces hidden behind cloth masks. "They're not coming to talk," she whispered. Ezra nodded grimly. "Pack only what matters. We leave in 5 minutes." But as Mercy reached for her small bundle of belongings, a child's scream cut through the night air. High and desperate, it came from the direction of the burning farm. She froze, her shortened arm tingling with sudden purpose. "Someone's trapped in that fire," she said. "Not our problem anymore," Ezra replied, though his voice lacked conviction. The scream came again, weaker this time. Mercy thought of little Tommy Henderson, barely 6 years old, always running through the tall grass near his family's wheat fields. The same boy whose fever she'd broken with willow bark tea just months before. "I can't run away from that sound," she said quietly. Outside, the masked riders had surrounded their cabin. Their leader's voice boomed through the walls. "Send out the cursed woman. Tonight we finish what the river started." Mercy looked at Ezra, seeing her own impossible choice reflected in his eyes. Stay and fight a dozen armed men, or flee while a child might be burning alive. Neither option promised survival, but only one promised she could live with herself afterward. "The back window leads to the creek bed," Ezra said suddenly. "You could reach the Henderson place without them seeing. What about you?" He smiled, the expression both sad and proud. "I'll give you the time you need. That's what mountain men do for the people they—" He stopped, unable to finish the sentence that would make leaving even harder. The child's scream came a third time, fainter now. Mercy grabbed the leather pouch containing her healing herbs and pressed a quick kiss to Ezra's cheek. "If I don't make it back, you will," he said firmly. "Because you're not cursed, Mercy Caldwell. You're blessed with the kind of courage most folks never find." She slipped through the window as the first gunshot shattered their front door. Behind her, Ezra's rifle answered with thunder of its own. Ahead, flames reached toward the star-filled sky like desperate fingers. And somewhere between the gunfire and the inferno, a woman who'd once been thrown away like garbage ran toward the very people who'd cast her out, carrying nothing but medicine and hope. Dawn revealed the true cost of the night's violence. The Henderson farmhouse stood as a blackened skeleton against the morning sky, but Tommy Henderson sat wrapped in Mercy's coat, alive and breathing. She'd pulled him from the smoke-filled root cellar, where he'd hidden when the flames started, her twisted fingers proving surprisingly strong when lives hung in the balance. Ezra leaned heavily against a fence post, his left shoulder bandaged but his eyes alert. 3 of the masked riders lay wounded in the dirt nearby, their fight knocked out of them by a mountain man who'd learned warfare in places far deadlier than Cedar Falls. "The boy's lungs are clear," Mercy announced, finishing her examination. "Scared, but he'll heal clean." Mrs. Henderson knelt beside her son, tears streaming down her soot-stained face. "You saved him," she whispered to Mercy. "After everything we did to you, you saved my baby." The crowd that had gathered kept their distance, but Mercy could feel their watching eyes. Some held shame on their faces, others showed confusion, as if the world had suddenly started spinning backward. A few still carried the hard suspicion that had marked her as cursed from birth. Deputy Wilson stepped forward, his badge catching the morning light. The cloth mask hung loose around his neck now, his identity revealed. "The fires," he said slowly. "They started after we visited your cabin, after we stirred up old fears." "Fear makes people do terrible things," Mercy replied, not looking up from Tommy's pulse. "But it doesn't have to keep making them." An older woman pushed through the crowd. Mrs. Fisher, the baker's wife. Her arthritic hands shook as she spoke. "My grandmother had fingers like yours. Said they could feel sickness before it showed. Called it a gift, not a curse." "Gifts run in families," another voice added. This time, it was Doc Morrison, the town's only trained physician. "I've been thinking about that since spring. About what we lost when we acted in ignorance." The crowd stirred uneasily. Change was coming to Cedar Falls, whether they wanted it or not, carried on the smoke of burnt barns and the courage of a woman who'd forgiven them before they'd even asked. "I want to come home," Mercy said suddenly, the words surprising even her. "Not to hide or prove anything, but to help. This town needs a healer who understands both medicine and mercy." She stood, Tommy's small hand still clasped in her shortened fingers. "But I won't beg for acceptance. I won't make myself small to fit into your comfort. Take me as I am, or let me go in peace." The silence stretched long enough for birds to return to their singing. Then Doc Morrison stepped forward and extended his hand. "Cedar Falls would be honored to have you back, Miss Caldwell, as our healer, as our neighbor." He paused, his voice growing stronger. "As our reminder that being different isn't the same as being wrong." One by one, others joined him. Not everyone, some folks would need more time to outgrow their fear, but enough to build a new foundation, where acceptance could grow. As the sun climbed higher, painting the mountains gold and purple, Mercy Caldwell walked back into the town that had once thrown her away. This time, she walked not as a victim or a supplicant, but as exactly what she'd always been. A healer, whose greatest medicine was the simple, revolutionary act of refusing to hate those who'd hated her first.